tires crunching on gravel echoed through the grand estate as the sleek black car made its way up the long driveway. The windows were rolled down just enough for the cool evening breeze to slip inside, but not enough to obscure the towering gates and high walls that seemed to shut out the rest of the world. As the car stopped in front of the grand house, its owner, Charles Harrington, stepped out, a billionaire in his late 40s, with an air of authority that only wealth and power could command. He scanned the large mansion that had been his home for over 15 years. But today, something felt different. The air was thicker, as if something was hanging just out of reach, waiting to be discovered. He had been away for the past few weeks, on a business trip across Europe, and now, he was back, ready to reclaim control over everything in his life. He had a reputation to maintain, and no one, especially not the help, was going to get in the way of that. As he stepped into the foyer, he was met by the sound of quiet whispers that echoed through the hallways. The staff went about their usual duties, but there was an unfamiliar tension in the air. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice sharp, sending a ripple of silence through the room. He was referring to Maya, the maid who had worked for him and his family for nearly a decade, the one who had always been so efficient, so reliable, yet so invisible. "Maya, sir?" The housekeeper, a middle-aged woman named Margaret, looked up with a hesitant expression. "She's in the nursery, with the children, sir." Charles raised an eyebrow, his expression hardening. He had never been a fan of how Maya seemed to take a personal interest in his children. He had always thought of her as little more than an employee. But today, something about the way Margaret said her name made him uneasy. Without another word, Charles made his way to the nursery. The room was quiet, save for the soft sound of a lullaby playing from an old music box. His two children, twins, sat on the floor, playing with their toys. And there, sitting on the edge of the bed, was Maya. She was whispering softly to them, her hand gently brushing the hair from their faces as she spoke. For a brief moment, Charles stood frozen in the doorway, watching. He had seen Maya with his children countless times before, but today felt different. She was not just the maid, not just the woman who cleaned their rooms and prepared their meals. There was a tenderness in her touch, a connection that he had never noticed before. The room seemed to hold its breath as Maya looked up, her eyes locking with Charles's. For a fleeting second, something passed between them, a silent understanding, a moment that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Then, the illusion shattered as Maya quickly stood up, straightening her uniform. She gave him a polite smile, but Charles could see the brief flicker of nervousness in her eyes. "Sir," she said softly, her voice steady but betraying a hint of uncertainty. "Your children were asking about you. They're eager to see you." Charles narrowed his eyes. There was something about the way she spoke, something about her demeanor, that unsettled him. Maya was never one to show emotion, never one to make things personal. But today, it was different. He stepped further into the room, his presence imposing as he looked down at his children. "Get up," he said, his tone cold. The twins, obedient as ever, stood up and rushed to their father, their faces lighting up with smiles. "Daddy," they exclaimed in unison, wrapping their tiny arms around him. Charles patted them absent-mindedly, but his eyes never left Maya. He could feel the weight of her gaze on him, as if she were silently daring him to acknowledge the truth. But he wouldn't. He couldn't. Not yet. "Margaret, can you take the children for a moment?" he said, his voice firm. Margaret nodded quickly and ushered the children out of the room. As they left, Charles turned back to Maya. The tension in the air was palpable now, thicker than before. Maya, standing in front of him, seemed small, almost insignificant. But there was something in the way she stood, the way her eyes met his with quiet defiance, that made him pause. He couldn't quite place it, but he felt as though he was on the verge of discovering something he wasn't ready to face. Charles felt the weight of Maya's words pressing against him like a vice, her calm defiance cutting through his thoughts. He had spent years living in a world where power was everything, where wealth and status allowed him to control every aspect of his life. But now, standing in this room with Maya, he realized how little he actually knew. The silence between them stretched, and for the first time, Charles felt a twinge of vulnerability. He had always believed that his money, his position, would protect him from the things that mattered less, the truths, the emotions, the people he didn't want to understand. But now, it was all coming undone. "You think you know everything, don't you?" he said, his voice betraying the first crack in his usual composure. "You think you can just walk in here and tell me what's going on?" Maya didn't flinch. She simply stood there, her eyes unwavering. "You've been blind to what's been right in front of you all these years," she replied softly. "Maybe it's time you opened your eyes." Charles stepped back, his hand gripping the back of a nearby chair for support. It felt like the floor was shifting beneath him, and he wasn't sure where he stood anymore. "What do you mean? What truth are you talking about?" His mind raced, trying to piece together the sudden shift in the room, the shift in the power dynamic. Maya had always been the help, always in the background, invisible, subservient. And yet, now she was holding something over him, something he didn't understand. "The truth is not what you think it is," Maya said, her voice steady. "It's not about power, or money, or what you can buy. It's about what you've been willing to ignore for so long." Charles opened his mouth to argue, but his words died in his throat. He could feel the truth in her words, a cold, sharp sting that made him uncomfortable. His thoughts raced as he tried to regain control of the situation, to remind himself that he was the one in charge. But something about Maya's presence, the quiet strength she exuded, was shaking him to his core. "You've always seen me as the help," she continued, her voice calm but firm. "But there's more to me than that, more than you could ever understand. And now, you're going to see what I've been hiding all along." The room seemed to close in on him. Charles felt the walls pressing against him, the air thick with tension. Maya wasn't just a maid. She wasn't just some background figure in his life. She was something else, someone else. And that realization sent a shiver down his spine. "What are you talking about?" Charles finally managed to force the words out, his voice rough, his mind struggling to catch up with the unfolding reality. Maya's gaze softened for a moment, but there was no trace of fear in her eyes, only a quiet resolve. "I'm not who you think I am, Charles," she said. "I've spent years playing the role you wanted me to play. But the truth is, I've always been more than that. And now, you'll see the part of me you've been blind to all these years." Charles felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had always thought of Maya as just another part of his world, someone who existed to serve him, to cater to his needs. But now, as she spoke, he realized how little he had truly seen her. He had been blind to everything that mattered, focused only on what he thought was important. Maya was no longer the quiet, invisible figure in the background. She was standing before him, holding the power, holding the truth that he had ignored for far too long. "You think you can just tell me what to do?" Charles's voice was thick with disbelief, his pride taking over. "You think you can just change everything with a few words?" Maya took a step closer, her presence commanding. "No, Charles," she said, her voice low and steady. "I'm not telling you what to do. I'm showing you what's been right in front of you all along." Charles could feel the ground shifting beneath him, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure where his footing was. The world he had built, the one he had controlled with money and power, was slipping away. And in its place was the truth, the reality he had long ignored. "You're going to see, Charles," Maya said, her words a quiet promise. "You're going to see what I've been hiding. You're going to see the truth, and you won't be able to ignore it anymore." Charles's heart raced as he stood there, unable to respond. He had spent so many years controlling everything around him, but now, in the face of Maya's quiet strength, he felt powerless. He was standing on the edge of something he couldn't control, something that was bigger than him. Maya was no longer the help. She was the one in charge now, and the truth she held was about to shatter everything Charles had ever known. Charles took a step back, his mind spinning. His grip tightened on the back of the chair, knuckles white as he tried to maintain control. Maya's words had shattered the illusion he had built around himself. Everything he thought he knew about her, about his family, about his power was slipping through his fingers. He had always assumed that he was the one who held the reins, the one who called the shots. But now, standing before Maya, he couldn't shake the feeling that the tables had turned. She wasn't just the maid. She wasn't just a servant in the background. No, Maya was something more. He could feel it in the air, thick with unspoken truths and hidden emotions. "You've always seen me as nothing," Maya said, her voice soft, but there was an undeniable weight behind her words. You've treated me like I was invisible, but I've always been here. I've always known what was going on. Charles shook his head, his thoughts racing, but his mouth was dry. What are you talking about? His voice was strained, and it took everything he had to keep the panic from seeping into his tone. Maya took a slow step forward, her eyes never leaving his. I know everything, Charles. The secrets you've kept hidden, the lies you've told, the power you've held over people, especially your children. But none of that matters anymore. The truth is coming, and it's going to change everything. Charles's heart began to race. He could feel the room closing in on him. The walls seemed to press in from all sides, and the air felt thick and suffocating. For the first time in his life, he felt small, insignificant, like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the abyss below. What truth? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Maya's gaze softened, but her words were firm. You've been blind, Charles. You've been blind to your own family, blind to the people who have always been there for you, but you're going to see it now. The truth that has been right in front of you all along. Charles took a step back, his mind scrambling for control. He had built his life on wealth, on status, on his ability to bend the world to his will. He had always believed that nothing could threaten that power. But now, standing before Maya, he realized how fragile everything truly was. I don't understand, he said, his voice cracking. What do you want from me? Maya took another step forward. And this time, there was no hesitation in her movement. I don't want anything from you, Charles. I'm not here to ask for your forgiveness. I'm here to show you that you've never truly known me, and you've never really seen what's been happening under your nose. Charles felt a wave of anger rise within him. His pride, his ego, were all starting to surface. He had spent his life building an empire, and now, here was this woman, this maid standing before him, challenging everything he had ever known. You're just the help, Maya, Charles spat, his words harsh. You don't get to tell me what I've seen or what I haven't. You're nothing. You always were. Maya's eyes narrowed, but there was no fear in them. Instead, there was something much stronger. Resolve. You think I'm nothing because that's what you've always told yourself. But I'm not nothing, Charles. I've been the one who's been holding this house together, taking care of your children, protecting them. You've never seen it. You've never seen the real me, and you've never seen the damage you've caused. But I'm about to make you see it. Charles felt his breath catch in his chest. He had always thought of himself as the one in control, the one who held all the power. But now, as Maya stood there, unflinching, he realized just how wrong he had been. His empire was built on illusions, on lies, on things he had never bothered to truly understand. You're lying, he said, his voice shaking, but Maya's gaze never wavered. I don't believe you. Maya shook her head slowly. It's not about belief, Charles. It's about truth. And the truth is, you've been blind to it all. To your family, to your children. You've been too busy with your own power to see the damage you've done. Charles's pulse quickened. The weight of her words was suffocating. Everything he thought he knew about his life, about the people around him, was now in question. I've always protected my family, he said, but the words felt empty, even to him. I've always done what was best for them. Maya's eyes softened with pity. You think you've been protecting them, Charles, but you've been hurting them, and the worst part is, you didn't even know it. The room felt colder now, as if the very air around him had shifted. Charles could feel the walls closing in, the weight of everything crashing down on him. He was no longer the powerful billionaire he had once been. He was just a man, standing in front of a woman who knew more about his life, his family, than he ever did. And that truth, that undeniable truth, was the most terrifying thing he had ever faced. Charles felt his heart race as Maya's words continued to linger in the air, heavy and unrelenting. The room seemed to close in around him, and for the first time, the house that once felt like his domain now seemed foreign. Every piece of furniture, every room, every hallway seemed to be reminding him of just how little he truly knew about the people in his life, especially the woman standing before him. He had spent years climbing to the top, building his empire, expecting people to fall in line, to obey, to do as they were told. But here he was, a billionaire, standing in the presence of someone who had quietly watched everything unravel, who knew things about him and his family that he had been blind to for far too long. "You think you know me, Maya?" Charles said, his voice shaky but growing in anger. "You think you understand what I've done for this family? For this business? I've given you everything, and this is how you repay me?" Maya stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. "You've given me nothing, Charles," she said softly, but the weight of her words hit him like a thunderclap. "You've given me a job, yes, but that's not the same as giving me respect. You've given me a place to work, but you've never seen me for who I really am." Charles took a deep breath, trying to steady his emotions. "So what? You think you're better than me now?" he said, his voice rising. "You think you've got all the answers? You're nothing more than a maid. You always will be." Maya's expression softened, and for the first time, Charles saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a mixture of sorrow and determination. "I'm not just a maid, Charles," she said, her voice calm yet powerful, "and I'm not here to prove myself to you. I'm here to show you the truth about your family, about your children, the truth about what's been happening right under your nose." Charles recoiled at the mention of his children. His mind raced with thoughts of his perfect little world, of the life he had built for them, of the way everything had always seemed to fall into place. He had never questioned his role as a father, as a protector, as the one who provided. But now, standing before Maya, he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something had always been wrong. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. "What's been happening to my children? What have you been hiding?" Maya took a step forward, her calm demeanor never faltering. "You've been blind to their pain, Charles," she said. "Your children have been suffering, and you haven't seen it. You've been so focused on your own world, on your own power, that you've missed the signs. You've ignored the things that matter most." Charles felt his breath catch in his throat as the realization hit him. He had been so wrapped up in his own success, in his own image, that he had failed to notice the cracks forming around him, the cracks in his family, the cracks in his relationship with his children. He had always assumed they were safe, that they were happy, but now he couldn't ignore the truth anymore. "I've been a good father," Charles said, his voice faltering. "I've given them everything they need." Maya's eyes softened with pity, but there was no judgment in them. "You've given them things, Charles," she said, "but you haven't given them love. You haven't given them attention. You haven't been present. And that's the truth you've been avoiding." Charles felt the weight of her words settle on his chest like a boulder. For the first time, he felt small, insignificant, like a man who had spent years building a facade only to have it crumble in an instant. I didn't know," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't realize." Maya nodded, her expression never changing. "That's the problem, Charles. You didn't realize. You never saw it. And now, it's too late." The finality in her voice hit him like a cold wave. It was as if everything he had ever known, everything he had ever worked for, had suddenly become meaningless. His empire, his wealth, his power, they were all just distractions. The real truth had always been there, waiting for him to see it. Maya took a step back, her eyes never leaving his. "You've lost them, Charles," she said softly. "You've lost your children, your family, and now it's too late to fix it. You can't go back. You can't undo the damage." Charles felt the weight of her words settle in his chest like a 1,000-pound anchor. He had always thought he was in control, that he could fix anything, that he could buy his way out of any problem. But this was different. This wasn't something money could fix. It wasn't something he could control. This was real, and it was too late. The room seemed to close in on him, and for the first time in years, he felt completely powerless. The empire he had built, the perfect life he had created for himself and his family, had been a lie. And now, as the truth hung in the air, Charles was forced to face the consequences of his actions, consequences he could no longer ignore. Charles stood frozen, the weight of Maya's words settling over him like a storm he couldn't escape. The walls that had once seemed so solid, the empire he had carefully constructed over the years, now felt hollow and fragile. For the first time in his life, he felt completely powerless. He had always been in control. Wealth, power, status, they had all been within his grasp. But now, as he stood in the room with Maya, it became clear that none of that mattered. The truth had come, and there was no running from it. He had always assumed that he could fix any problem, buy any solution, control any situation. But this was different. This was a truth he couldn't escape, a reality he had long ignored. Maya wasn't just a maid. She wasn't just a figure in the background, a servant who obeyed his commands. She was the one who had seen everything: the cracks in his family, the pain his children had suffered, the consequences of his absence, and his selfishness. "You've been living in a lie, Charles." Maya's voice broke through the fog of his thoughts. "Your wealth, your power, none of it means anything if you don't have the people who matter. And you've lost them." Charles opened his mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. He couldn't deny it. He had been too focused on himself, on building his empire, to see the people who truly needed him. The children he claimed to protect, the wife he barely saw, the people around him who had been quietly suffering. They were all invisible to him, hidden behind his world of luxury and control. The guilt hit him like a punch to the gut. It had always been so easy to dismiss the small things, the details that didn't fit into his perfect world. But now, those details were all he could see. Maya had been there all along, quietly observing, holding everything together while he was too blinded by his own success to notice. "It's too late," Maya said, her voice tinged with sadness. "You can't change what's already been done. You can't undo the years of neglect, the emotional distance, the damage." Charles felt the weight of her words crush him. He had always believed that he could fix anything. But now, staring into Maya's eyes, he realized the truth. He couldn't fix this. He couldn't fix the years of pain he had caused. He couldn't fix the damage to his family. He had let everything slip through his fingers. "I didn't know," he whispered, the words sounding weak and hollow. "I didn't know they were suffering. I thought I was doing what was best for them." Maya's gaze softened, but there was no sympathy in her eyes. "You thought you were doing what was best for them. But you never stopped to ask what they needed. You thought your money, your status, would make everything better. But it didn't. It never does." Charles closed his eyes, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He had been so blind, so focused on the wrong things. He had spent his life chasing power, but now he realized that power had come at the cost of everything that truly mattered. Maya had been right all along. "What can I do now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Is there anything left to fix?" Maya looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You can't fix everything, Charles. Some things are broken beyond repair. But maybe, just maybe, you can start by acknowledging the truth. You've been running from it for so long. Maybe it's time to face it." Charles opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. There was no turning back now. The truth was staring him in the face, and for the first time, he had to confront it. He had to face the man he had become, the father he had failed to be, the husband who had neglected his wife. There was no excuse, no justification. He had been blind, and now, the consequences were impossible to ignore. Maya's words echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of everything he had overlooked. "You've lost them, Charles," she had said. "You've lost your family." The weight of that statement was overwhelming. He had built his life on the belief that he could control everything. But now, he was left with the ruins of his empire, the broken pieces of a life he had never truly understood. "I can't fix the past," Charles said finally, his voice hoarse with emotion. "But I can try to change. I can try to make things right." Maya's expression softened, but there was no hint of hope in her eyes. "It's a start, Charles," she said quietly, "but the road ahead won't be easy, and you may never fully make up for the damage that's been done." Charles nodded slowly, the reality of her words settling in. He couldn't undo the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could start to rebuild. He wasn't sure if he could ever earn back the love and trust he had lost, but one thing was clear: he was no longer the man he had been. And as Maya turned to leave, Charles knew that his life had just changed forever. Charles sat in the quiet of his office, the weight of his decisions pressing heavily on him. It had been hours since Maya had left, but her words continued to echo in his mind. He had always thought of himself as a man in control, someone who could fix any problem with the snap of his fingers. But now, everything felt different. The empire he had spent years building, his wealth, his status, his influence seemed insignificant in the face of the truth that Maya had revealed. He could still see her eyes, steady and unwavering, as she had told him that the damage was already done, that he had lost his family. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He had spent so many years chasing after success, believing that it would give him everything he needed, that it would protect him. But in the end, it had only driven a wedge between him and the people who mattered most. His children, his wife, the people he loved, he had failed them. As he sat there, Charles felt a sense of urgency wash over him. He couldn't just sit back and accept that he had lost everything. He had to try to make things right. He had to find a way to fix the broken relationships that were now scattered like pieces of glass on the floor. The question was, where did he even begin? He had spent so many years focused on his career, on building his name, that he had forgotten what it meant to truly be present for the people he loved. Maya had opened his eyes to that truth, but it was too late to undo the past. Charles had made mistakes, and he knew he couldn't take them back. But maybe, just maybe, he could start again. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a knock at the door. He looked up, and for a moment, he felt a pang of hope. Maybe someone could give him some answers. Maybe they could tell him what to do next. But when the door opened, it was not the person he expected. It was his wife, Olivia. She stood there in the doorway, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick, heavy with the unspoken words that neither of them knew how to say. Finally, Olivia stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. She didn't look at him, but he could feel her eyes on him, studying him, weighing him. "I didn't know," Charles said, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't realize how far I'd gone, how much I had ignored." Maya was right. "I've been blind. I've been so focused on everything else that I failed to see what was right in front of me. I've lost you, Olivia. I've lost my children. I've lost everything." Olivia didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, her hands folded in front of her, her back straight, as though she were holding herself together. Charles could see the pain in her eyes, the hurt that he had caused, but also the exhaustion. She had been carrying so much for so long, and he had never even noticed. "I know," Olivia said quietly, her voice tinged with sorrow. "I know you've been lost, Charles. I've been watching you, and I've been waiting for you to see it, for you to wake up. But you were so caught up in your own world, in your own success, that you couldn't see what was happening around you. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay." Charles felt a lump form in his throat as he listened to her words. For so long, he had believed that as long as he was providing for his family, as long as he was giving them everything they needed, that everything would be fine. But he had been wrong. Maya had been right. Olivia needed more than just material things. She needed him. She needed his presence, his attention, his love. "I've been selfish," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I've been so caught up in my own world that I never saw how much you were hurting. I never saw how much the children needed me. I've failed you, Olivia. And I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try. I want to be the man you need, the father our children deserve." Olivia looked at him, her expression softening for the first time. "I want to believe you, Charles," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I want to believe that you can change, but it's going to take time. It's going to take more than just words. You've got to show me. You've got to show all of us that you're willing to put in the effort, that you're willing to be there, truly there, for us. Not just when it's convenient, not just when it suits you, but every day." Charles nodded slowly, his heart heavy but determined. "I know," he said. "I know it's not going to be easy. I know I can't just undo the years I've wasted, but I'm going to try. I will do whatever it takes to prove to you, to our children, that I'm here. I'm here for you." Olivia looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his, as if trying to find the truth in his words. Finally, she nodded, just slightly, as if accepting the possibility, but not yet fully convinced. "I hope you can, Charles. I really do." With that, she turned and walked toward the door, pausing just before she opened it. "We'll see," she said quietly, before leaving him alone in the room once again. Charles stood there, staring at the closed door. The weight of the moment settled over him, and for the first time in a long while, he felt the gravity of his choices. He had lost so much, but maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to rebuild. It wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to try, and that, for now, was all he could do. Charles stood in the middle of his living room, the weight of his conversation with Olivia hanging heavily in the air. The silence in the house felt suffocating, a stark contrast to the chaotic life he had led just weeks ago. He had promised Olivia he would change, that he would do whatever it took to rebuild their family. But the road ahead felt uncertain, treacherous. Maya's words rang in his ears. Times, "You've lost them, Charles. You've lost your family asterisk." It was a painful truth, one that he couldn't ignore any longer. He had spent years building his empire, thinking that power and money could fix everything. But now, standing here in the silence, he realized how wrong he had been. His wealth couldn't fix the damage he had caused, the distance he had placed between himself and the people who mattered most. He had neglected them for far too long. The children he claimed to protect, the wife who had supported him through everything he had failed them. He had let his ambitions, his desire for success, cloud his judgment. As the hours passed, Charles found himself pacing back and forth, lost in thought. He had always been in control, always the one who set the rules, the one who made the decisions. But now, he was unsure of what to do next. He couldn't just continue on this path, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. He needed to prove to Olivia, to his children, that he could be a better man. But where did he start? How could he undo the years of neglect, the emotional distance, the pain he had caused? The answer didn't come easily, but as he stood there, he knew one thing for sure. He had to be present. He had to show up. For his family, for his children, for Olivia. He couldn't fix everything at once, but he could start small. He could start by being there, by showing that he cared. Charles knew it wouldn't be easy. Trust had been broken, and words alone wouldn't be enough. But he had to try, and for the first time, he was willing to put in the work. He couldn't change the past, but he could change the future. Just as the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the room, Charles made a decision. He would not let his family fall apart. He would not let his mistakes define him. He would rebuild. It wouldn't be easy. The damage was deep, and the road ahead would be long. But Charles had lived his life with a sense of certainty, of control. Now, he would live it with humility and presence. It was time to be the man he had always promised he would be. He stepped toward the phone, his hands trembling slightly as he dialed Olivia's number. The phone rang for a moment before she picked up. "Olivia," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "I know I've made mistakes. I know I've hurt you, and I've hurt our family, but I want to try. I want to be here, for you and for the kids. I know I can't fix everything, but I'm ready to do the work. I want to prove to you that I can be the man you need. I need to make things right." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, Charles thought she might hang up, or say that it was too late, that he had already lost her. But then she spoke, her voice softer than it had been in days. "Charles," Olivia said, her voice full of emotion, "I don't know if I can believe everything you say yet, but I can see that you're trying. That's a start. It's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of work, but I'm willing to see where this goes. For the kids, and for us." Charles exhaled, a wave of relief washing over him. He knew this was just the beginning, that it would take much more than a single conversation to heal the wounds he had caused. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. "Thank you," he said softly. "I'll do whatever it takes." As he ended the call, he walked over to the window and looked out at the sprawling estate. The house that had once felt like his fortress now seemed like a symbol of everything he had lost. But in that moment, Charles realized something important. It wasn't the house, or the wealth, or the power that defined him. It was his family, and if he could win them back, if he could prove that he was worthy of their trust, then he could rebuild. He wasn't sure how long it would take, or what the future held. But for the first time in years, he was ready to face it. He was ready to be the man he needed to be, not just for himself, but for the people he loved. It was time to make things right, no matter how long it took. The next few days were a blur for Charles. Every moment felt heavy, each decision weighed down by the realization of how much he had neglected. He had made the promise to Olivia, to his children, but now came the hard part, proving that he could be the man he had claimed to be. He had no illusions that things would change overnight. The damage he had done, the emotional walls he had built, wouldn't come down with just a few kind words or gestures. He had to earn back the trust he had shattered, and that was going to take time. He spent hours reflecting on his actions, on how blind he had been to everything that truly mattered. Each meeting he had felt hollow, as if the person he was before had ceased to exist. He had been living a lie, and now he was desperately trying to find his way back to something real. But each step forward felt like wading through thick mud, his past mistakes pulling at him, trying to drag him back to where he had been. At night, when the house was quiet, Charles found himself sitting alone in his study, staring at the dimly lit room. His thoughts drifted to Olivia. She was still distant, but he could see small cracks in the armor she had built around herself. He could see that she was trying, and for the first time, he wasn't alone in the effort. His children, however, were another story. His eldest, Lily, had been distant, her once bubbly nature now tempered by caution. She was the most hurt by his absence, by his failure to be the father she needed. Each time he tried to reach out to her, she would smile politely, but there was no warmth behind it, no trust. He knew he had to prove himself to her, just as he had to prove himself to Olivia. The days passed, and Charles tried to make small changes, to show up more, to be present in their lives. He would spend time with Lily, sitting quietly with her, asking her about her day, and even helping her with her homework, something he had never done before. It was awkward at first, both of them unsure of how to bridge the gap that had grown between them. But slowly, Charles could see her starting to open up. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. He realized that being a father wasn't just about providing for them, about giving them everything they needed. It was about being there for them, about showing up, even when things were hard. Slowly, Lily began to talk to him more, sharing things that had been bothering her. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Meanwhile, Olivia had remained cautious. She hadn't fully let her guard down, and Charles understood why. Trust, once broken, wasn't something that could be easily repaired. He had hurt her deeply, and now he had to prove that he was truly committed to change. One evening, after another long day of trying to bridge the gap, Charles found himself sitting on the porch, staring out at the vast estate. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. The breeze was cool, and the sky was painted with hues of orange and pink. He could hear the faint sound of laughter from inside the house, Lily and his younger son, Ben, playing together in the living room. He could hear Olivia's soft voice, and it hit him hard. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged here. He wasn't just a figurehead, a distant provider. He was part of this family, and that meant everything to him. Just as he was lost in his thoughts, Olivia stepped out onto the porch, her silhouette framed by the doorway. She walked over to him, her steps measured but purposeful. "How's it going with Lily?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Charles turned to her, feeling a lump form in his throat. "It's slow," he admitted, "but she's starting to talk to me. We're getting there." Olivia nodded, her expression unreadable. She sat down beside him, the space between them still vast but no longer insurmountable. "I can see that you're trying, Charles," she said, her voice quieter now. "I know it's not going to be easy, but it's a start." He let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "I'm sorry, Olivia, for everything, for not being there, for not seeing you, for not seeing the kids. I've messed up, but I'm trying. I know I have a lot to prove, but I want to show you that I can be the man you need, the father our kids need." Olivia turned to him, her eyes softening for the first time in weeks. "I want to believe you, Charles," she said quietly. "I really do. But it's going to take more than words. It's going to take time." Charles nodded, understanding fully. "I'm not expecting things to change overnight. I know it's going to be a long road, but I'm willing to walk it, for you, for the kids, for us." Olivia sat in silence for a moment, her hand reaching for his. Their fingers brushed, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like the distance between them had shrunk just a little. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes spoke volumes. There was a glimmer of hope there, a faint spark that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what had been broken. Charles held her hand tightly, not knowing what the future would bring, but knowing that, for the first time, he was on the right path. It wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to fight for his family, ready to prove that he could be the man he had promised to be all along. Charles had barely slept that night. His mind raced through every decision he had made, every mistake he had taken for granted. The weight of his past hung over him like a storm cloud, threatening to break at any moment. He had promised Olivia that he would change, but words alone could never be enough. Change wasn't just about saying the right things, it was about action, about proving himself, about doing the hard work to rebuild what had been broken. He wasn't sure if he could fix everything, but he had to try. As the morning sun rose, Charles stood at the window, looking out at the sprawling estate. The quiet beauty of the place had always comforted him, but now it felt like a reminder of everything he had lost, of the family he had neglected. The house was still, peaceful, yet it felt hollow, as if waiting for something, or someone, to fill the space again. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he couldn't stay in this limbo any longer. It was time to face the consequences of his actions and take responsibility. He had to make things right. He couldn't change the past, but he could control what happened next. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. Olivia entered the room, her expression guarded but not as cold as it had been. She still wasn't ready to fully let go of her doubts, and Charles could understand that. He had betrayed her trust, and trust was not something that could be rebuilt overnight. But he had to try. "Olivia," he said, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. "I know I've made mistakes. I know that I can't change what's been done, but I'm here now. I'm here to show you that I'm willing to do whatever it takes, to earn back your trust, to be the man you deserve." Olivia looked at him, her eyes tired but not without a trace of something softer, something hopeful. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, her gaze fixed on him. "It's going to take more than words, Charles," she finally said, her voice quiet but firm. "You've hurt me. You've hurt our family. I can't just forget that. But I see that you're trying. I see that you want to change, that you want to make things right." Charles felt a flicker of hope, but it was tempered by the weight of what she had said. Trying wasn't enough. He had to prove it. "I'm not asking for forgiveness right away," he said, his voice gentle. "I'm asking for a chance. A chance to prove that I'm willing to fight for us. For you, for the kids. I want to be the man I should have been all along." Olivia nodded slowly, her expression softening just a fraction. "I don't know if we can ever go back to what we had, Charles," she said quietly. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see where this goes. But you need to understand that it's going to be a long road. I can't promise that things will be the same again." Charles swallowed hard, his throat tightening with emotion. He knew she was right. Things wouldn't go back to the way they were, not immediately, and maybe never. But he was ready for that. He was ready to do the work, to face the consequences, to rebuild, no matter how long it took. "I understand," he said, "and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I won't give up on us. I promise you that." Olivia's gaze softened as she stepped closer to him. For a moment, they simply stood there in silence, the weight of the moment hanging between them. Neither of them had the answers yet, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like they were on the same page. They were both willing to fight, to make things right. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was a start. Charles felt a surge of gratitude in that moment. He didn't deserve Olivia's willingness to try, but he was grateful for it nonetheless. He was grateful for the chance to prove himself, to prove that he could change. He could hear the sound of Lily and Ben in the background, playing together. He knew he had a lot of work to do with them, too. His children, especially Lily, had been hurt the most by his absence, and he knew he had to earn back their trust just as much as Olivia's. But for now, he had this moment. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was moving in the right direction. The storm inside him had not yet passed, but he was no longer lost in it. He was beginning to find his way out. "I'm not asking for everything to change in a day," he said quietly. "I know it's going to take time, but I'm ready to work for it. I'll prove it to you, Olivia. I'll prove it to all of you." Olivia didn't answer right away, but Charles could see the flicker of something in her eyes, something that hadn't been there in a long time. It wasn't a full return of trust, but it was a crack in the door, a crack that hadn't been there before. It was all he could ask for. He had taken the first step, and now he had to keep walking. One step at a time, he would prove that he was capable of change. One step at a time, he would rebuild the life that had been broken. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick. But for the first time in a long time, Charles had hope. And hope, no matter how small, was all he needed to keep moving forward. Days turned into weeks, and Charles continued his effort to rebuild what he had broken. Every morning, he woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. He had no illusions that this would be easy, but he was committed. His relationship with Olivia, still fragile, required constant attention. He took small steps, helping more around the house, showing up for family dinners, having open conversations. With Lily and Ben, the distance that had existed between them slowly began to shrink. His older daughter, Lily, still kept a guarded distance, but she had begun to share little things with him, small talks about school, her friends, her hobbies. Charles listened carefully, without trying to fix things immediately, knowing that just being there was a huge part of what she needed. Ben, the younger of the two, was more open, eager to spend time with his father. Their bonding moments came easily, through simple activities like playing games or watching movies. But Charles knew that, despite the small progress, the real test would come when the cracks in his family's foundation were truly revealed. One afternoon, Charles decided to take a step that would test his commitment. He invited Olivia for a walk in the park. The weather was perfect, the sky clear and blue, the air crisp. It felt like the perfect opportunity to have an open conversation, to see if any real progress had been made in their relationship. As they walked side by side, the silence between them was not uncomfortable, but it was heavy. Olivia had agreed to this walk, and Charles could tell she was trying, just as he was, but there was still so much unspoken between them. After a few moments, Olivia spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Charles, I've been thinking a lot lately, about everything we've been through, about where we are now." Charles felt his heart tighten. This was the moment. "I know I've hurt you," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "I can't change the past, but I want to make sure I'm not repeating the same mistakes. I'm here, Olivia. I'm not going anywhere." Olivia stopped walking for a moment, turning to face him. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, a glimmer of something that hadn't been there in a long time. "I'm not sure if I can ever fully forgive you," she said slowly. "But I'm willing to try, Charles. I'm willing to see if things can be different. But I need more than just promises. I need action. I need to see that this is real." Charles nodded. He had been prepared for this. It wasn't enough to just say the right things. He had to prove it, day by day. "I understand," he said, looking into her eyes. "I'll prove it, Olivia. I will. I won't stop trying." The silence that followed was different this time, not as heavy as before. Olivia reached out, taking his hand, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a connection, a shared understanding. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Later that evening, as they sat down for dinner, Charles could feel a shift. Lily, who had been reserved, was now engaging in conversation, telling a funny story from school. Ben was eagerly asking his father questions, excited to share his day. Olivia, although still cautious, was more present than she had been in weeks. It wasn't a magical transformation, but it was progress. Charles knew that rebuilding trust and love was a long-term commitment, not something that could be fixed overnight. As the days went on, the family slowly began to come back together. Charles spent more time with each of them, making small but significant changes. He made sure to show up at their important moments, whether it was attending Lily's school play or having breakfast with Ben before school. One afternoon, as Charles sat in his office, he received an unexpected call. It was Maya. Her voice, though familiar, felt distant as she spoke. "Sir, I just wanted to check in. I know things have been complicated, but I wanted you to know that I've seen a difference in you. You're trying, and I hope it's not too late for you to make things right." Charles felt a pang in his chest as he heard Maya's words. She was right. It wasn't too late. It was never too late to change, to start anew. "Thank you, Maya," he said, his voice steady. "I'm trying, and I will keep trying." As he ended the call, he sat back in his chair, reflecting on how far he had come and how far he still had to go. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. The storm of his past mistakes had not fully passed, but it was clearing, and in its wake, there was hope. Hope that things could be different. Hope that, with time, he could make things right. It wasn't going to be easy, but Charles was determined. He would keep showing up, he would keep trying, and in the end, maybe that was enough. The weeks that followed were not without their challenges, but Charles found himself fighting harder than he ever had before. He had made the decision to change, and he knew that this path would not be easy. But for the first time in a long while, he was fully committed. His relationship with Olivia was still fragile, and though they had made progress, he knew trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight. But something had shifted in both of them, a recognition that they had both been carrying the weight of their past mistakes, and now, they were willing to share that burden. Charles worked harder than ever to prove himself. He spent countless hours at home, engaging with the children, listening to them, being there for them in ways he had never been before. Lily, once distant, now began to open up to him more. At first, it had been small things, talking about her day, asking him for help with schoolwork, but slowly, the walls between them started to crumble. He wasn't the perfect father, but he was showing up, and that meant something. Ben, too, was more eager to spend time with him. Whether they were playing basketball in the yard, or just sitting down to watch a movie, it was clear that his presence was making a difference. Olivia, however, was a different story. She was still hesitant, still waiting for him to prove that the change was real, and Charles understood that. His betrayal had cut deep, and it would take time for her to believe that he wouldn't make the same mistakes again. Every day, he tried to show her that he was committed to doing the work, whether it was taking over some of the household responsibilities or making more of an effort to show appreciation for her. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Olivia spoke up. "Charles," she said, her voice quiet but steady, "I've been watching you. I see what you're doing. I see the effort you're putting in, and I appreciate it. I really do." Charles looked at her, feeling a mixture of hope and fear. He knew this was the first time in a long while that she had acknowledged the changes he was making. "I know it's not enough yet," he replied, his voice sincere. "I know I can't undo the past. But I'm trying. I want to prove to you, to our family, that I can be the man I should have been all along." Olivia paused, her gaze softening. She didn't say anything immediately, but for the first time in months, there was a warmth in her eyes. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. It was a sign that she was willing to let him try, willing to see if the man he was now could become the man she needed him to be. The next few weeks were filled with small moments of progress. Charles spent time with the children, helping them with school projects, attending their events, and just being present in their lives. He noticed the small changes in them, the way Lily was laughing more, the way Ben seemed to seek him out for advice, for help. It was subtle, but it was progress. His efforts didn't go unnoticed by Olivia either. She started to trust him a little more each day, allowing him to take on more responsibility around the house, trusting him with the small tasks that had once fallen solely on her. Charles knew this was just the beginning, that the road ahead was still long and uncertain. But as he stood in the living room one evening, looking at his family gathered around the table, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The past wasn't gone, but it was no longer all-consuming. He could see the path forward now, slow, uncertain, but full of hope. He still had a lot to prove, but for the first time in his life, he was willing to do the hard work, day in and day out. Olivia's eyes met his across the table, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled at him, small, tentative, but genuine. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a step forward. And for Charles, that was enough for now. Months passed, and Charles's life had become an entirely new chapter. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but every day felt like a small victory. The long road of rebuilding trust, one step at a time, was proving to be harder than he had imagined, but there was progress. He had not only committed himself to change, but he had also embraced the fact that this journey was as much about becoming the man he needed to be for his family as it was about healing the wounds he had inflicted. His relationship with Olivia, though still fragile, was growing stronger. There were moments when they would sit together, not saying much, but the quiet comfort between them spoke volumes. It wasn't the passionate love they once shared, but there was a quiet respect building a foundation that had been missing for so long. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Olivia turned to Charles, her voice softer than it had been in years. "I see you, Charles," she said. "I see the changes. I see how hard you're trying, and I'm beginning to believe that maybe we can make this work." Charles's heart swelled with emotion, but he didn't speak right away. He had spent so many years trying to make her see what he could offer. But now, he was focused on showing her through his actions. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I know it's been hard. I know it's going to take time, but I won't stop trying." That night, Charles lay awake, thinking about how far they had come. He had been so focused on his own success, so consumed by his own ambitions, that he had neglected the people who mattered most. But now, he realized that success wasn't measured by wealth or status, it was measured by the love and trust of the people who mattered most to him. And he was willing to work every day for that. Weeks later, Charles's efforts began to bear fruit. His relationship with Lily, who had been so distant, was beginning to heal. They spent more time together, and each conversation, each small interaction, built trust. Lily still had her guard up, but there was a quiet change in her, a willingness to share more with him, to allow him into her world. Ben, the younger one, had been more open from the start, and he seemed to sense the change in his father. They had become close, enjoying activities together, whether it was basketball in the driveway or a quiet afternoon of watching a movie. Olivia, too, had started to trust him again, though she still held some reservations. It was clear she wasn't ready to fully let go of her doubts, but the small, quiet moments spoke volumes. There was one evening, as the family sat together for dinner, when Charles realized just how far they had come. Lily smiled at him, genuinely, and asked if he would help her with a school project. Ben laughed at something silly, and Olivia joined in, her laughter ringing through the room. It wasn't perfect. The wounds weren't all healed, and the past still hovered between them. But in that moment, Charles understood. They were together. They were fighting for their family, for the bond that had been almost lost. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and that was what mattered. After dinner, as the family settled into their evening routine, Charles stepped outside for a moment. The stars were beginning to appear in the dark sky, the night air cool against his skin. He leaned against the railing of the porch, looking out at the estate. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. The weight of his past mistakes still lingered, but it no longer controlled him. He had taken responsibility, he had shown up, and now, he was starting to see the fruits of his labor. He wasn't the man he once was, and he wasn't the man he had hoped to be, but he was becoming someone who was worthy of his family's love and trust. Olivia joined him on the porch, standing silently beside him. Without a word, she took his hand, her fingers brushing his. It was a small gesture, but to Charles, it meant everything. He looked at her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he saw hope in her eyes. "We're getting there," she said softly. "I'm starting to believe in us again." Charles squeezed her hand, his heart full. "I won't stop, Olivia. I won't stop trying." And as they stood there together, with the stars above and the promise of tomorrow in the air, Charles realized that no matter how hard the road ahead might be, he was ready to walk it with his family by his side. In this heartfelt and powerful story of transformation, Charles, a once powerful and successful man, faces the consequences of his actions as he attempts to rebuild his broken relationships with his family. As his world crumbles due to years of neglect, he struggles to earn back the trust of his wife, Olivia, and his children. Through his journey of redemption, Charles begins to understand the value of family and the power of presence over wealth. Along the way, he finds hope in the small, daily changes that reflect his growth, and the challenges he faces bring him closer to those he has hurt the most. This is a story filled with love, self-discovery, and healing, a story that echoes themes of redemption found in many powerful Black stories. Charles's emotional journey serves as a reminder that wealth and success are fleeting, but the bonds we build with our loved ones are what truly matter. As the story progresses, Charles proves that change is possible, no matter how far someone has fallen, echoing the themes of resilience and strength found in Black stories. With each step, Charles shows that it is never too late to make things right, and it's through love and commitment that he begins to mend his fractured family. The heartfelt moments between father and children, husband and wife, serve as a testament to the power of trying again and the strength of family ties. Black stories often highlight the power of transformation and the profound impact of personal growth, and this story is no exception. As Charles and his family navigate the challenges of rebuilding their trust, they begin to see a future filled with hope and healing, a future that celebrates second chances, a common thread in Black stories. In the end, Charles finds redemption not through wealth or status, but through the simple yet powerful act of showing up for his family, an inspiring reminder that true wealth lies in the connections we nurture and the love we give.